Hey guys, it's Christian, your Vancouver Realtor, and the topic for today's video is stick handling through closing nightmares. We've had a few of these recently, and so I want to share with you what you can do if you find yourself in one of these instances. Okay, so the very first one is sellers refusing to close. You're going to see this a lot more in a hot market like we're in right now, where, the sellers sold their property around Christmas time. They're out looking for a new one, and then they realize 6 weeks later, whoa, it's $80,000, $90,000 more for the same thing around Christmas time. And they may start to panic, they may have doubts, and they may just decide they don't want to move. And this is a situation we encountered last month, and that was where the seller started to communicate to us through the listing agents that she didn't want to move. So as soon as I heard that, I put my client in touch with a lawyer for closing. And by the way, when you're closing, you have a lawyer or a notary. They basically do the same thing. They cost about the same amount. Lawyers obviously can provide legal advice. And if you think that that you need to get legal opinions on things, obviously use a lawyer for the closing. So anyway, what I noticed about this deal was that the seller's agents were unprofessional. They didn't seem to understand the seriousness of contract law. And I tried to explain it to them, but I guess I wasn't effective enough. And so I explained to my client that we would have to get a lawyer. And in this instance, the seller was just dragging her heels. And finally, a day before closing, we get the call that she's not even going to move out. So what do? Obviously, we get our client in touch with a lawyer, and our lawyer drafts a demand letter. And in that demand letter, it says some very important things. These are the financial penalties and consequences that a seller faces if they do not close, and they're very serious. The most important of it, which is, if my client had to go buy another property, and it cost an extra $100,000. Guess who's on the hook? That's right. The seller legally could be responsible for the difference of the purchase price. So if my client goes from a $600,000 to a $700,000 purchase, that's $100,000 that my client can get from the seller through legal proceedings. And so apparently the seller was unaware of this. Even the seller's agents didn't take this seriously. Well, nothing that a good demand letter from a lawyer can't cure. Okay, story number 2, it deals with attached items. So when you're buying a place in British Columbia, anything that's attached or screwed into the wall comes with the home. And it's not to be removed by the seller prior to closing and pulled out of the property. And so there's a section in the contract that deals with these types of things. And there's another section that actually deals with inclusions and exclusions. And inclusions in BC mean including appliances, fridge, the stove, the washer, dryer, all that stays in the property. I know in Quebec, they'll actually pull out the appliances in some cases, but not in BC, they stay. And if there's exclusions, things that you do not want included, there's a section in the contract where you just write that in, like, we don't want that shed in the backyard because it looks disgusting. So what I do as a listing agent is I always walk through with the property with my client and say, look, is there anything of sentimental value here? For example, this chandelier, because grandmother gave it to them. Well, you want to put that in the exclusions and make sure, and so that the buyer is aware of that. There was a very well-publicized case a number of years back where the sellers had forgotten to do that, and the buyers thought that this chandelier was included with the house. Turns out the chandelier was the seller had taken it with them. Well, it was something like a $50,000 chandelier. So you can imagine the buyer would have been shocked by that. So inclusions and exclusions, very important to get that right. Now, Third thing is replacing items. Now, let's say we're on the buyer's side. You've got an accepted offer. We do the inspection and we find out the washing machine is not working. Well, what we do is we have the seller replace that washing machine with an equal or better quality version. The other thing, of course, you can do is you can negotiate a little bit off the price if the seller is willing to engage with you on that, and have them compensate you for it, and you can just go out and buy a washer yourself. Now, in a hot market though, you may find that hard to do. We had an instance where we had done an inspection, electric fireplace was not working, and it was really the focal point of the living room. And we had an addendum written up. Seller was gonna replace it. Well, unfortunately, the seller got the wrong fireplace. They got a cheaper quality. I think they just didn't know what they were doing, and it didn't fit the opening of the fireplace. It looked terrible. And of course, my buyer was a little traumatized by this, so I had to get on the phone. We had to work through it, but eventually we got the fireplace replaced with the exact same replica model. But of course, over time, you might not find the same model. So those are just some things to be aware of when you are having items replaced because of they've been found to be faulty during an inspection. Now, just as an extension of that, there is a term in the purchase contract that does say that the seller has the obligation to leave the home in exactly the same condition, right? So whether it's appliances have been changed, or for example, during the move out, they put holes in the wall because the movers got sloppy and started banging things around. Again, the seller is actually responsible for that. You may have to take them to small claims court for the damages, which might be a paint job, but just so you know, they have to leave it to you on the very same condition as the day you last viewed it. And that's also in the purchase agreement. All right, last story. This is dealing with garbage and belongings that's left behind on the property. I'd say out of every 70 or 80 deals I do, you're dealing with somebody like a hoarder, and they just have a whole bunch of crap and they leave it behind. And we put a term in the agreement that says, look, you're going to leave this property free and clear of belongings. It means sellers got to get that stuff out. So you're moving into a vacant property. Well, if you're dealing with a hoarder like you see on those American TV shows where you literally can't move around, that may be a challenge. I had a colleague of mine who literally had to call in a moving company like a garbage removal company, because the seller on the closing date in his instance had just not moved anything out. And there's people who do this. It's a 1 in 100, but it happens. In my case, I've had that happen too, but much smaller, at a much lower level. We've had it where sellers have left, cupboards and closets behind that we hadn't asked for. So we just dismantled them. I called 1-800-JUNK. We got that stuff out of there. And that's the same thing that you can do as well. It's probably $150, $170 or so. So those are just some examples of closing nightmares, and you can stick handle through them. It's not too difficult. If you've got questions or comments, you can leave those below. If you have other nightmares that you've been through, you can leave those below and let us know how you handle them. And we'll see you next time.